world according to Jen and Carolyn.
Hello.
Hello.
All right, everybody. So this is part 2 of From Horrors to Homelessness, how our crumbling mental health system contributed to a crisis on our streets. We talked about part 1, the history of mental health and institutions in our country and how absolutely abysmal a lot of those places are. And now we're going to talk about how we got to where we are today. And so, Carol and I are going to focus on San Francisco in this because that's where we live. We love the city.
We see some things.
We see some shit.
On a daily basis. You and I will text each other like, hey, guess what I just saw?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then it's usually followed by, this is sad.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's nothing but sad. I mean, sadness, I think, is the most prevalent feeling associated with what we see on a daily basis. And so, we love this city. I'm raising a 5th generation San Franciscan here. Carolyn grew up here. My mom grew up here. My husband grew up here. And we believe in the city and we love the city. And we also understand that there needs to be a fundamental shift in policy and practice. And that has to happen if we're going to address the root cause of so much of our homeless crisis, which is mental illness.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm not here to cast blame, right?
No.
I work in government. We are all trying so hard to address these issues. Yeah. There is so much money being spent to address let's call it what it is. It's a crisis.
Absolutely.
But there's one component that is missing, and we're going to get into what that is. So, welcome to part 2 of the history of psychiatric care in the U.S. So, I want to start with, we are unabashed Democrats. We are not fans of Ronald Reagan. And so we're going to talk about Ronald Reagan because he so often is associated with the demise of the mental health care system in California in particular.
Yeah.
He doesn't or shouldn't bear all the blame, but he really... Yeah, he bears a lot of the blame. So
the AIDS crisis and a lot of public health issues.
Totally. Saying ketchup is a vegetable when not wanting to fund school lunches. Yeah. He's that kind of asshole. So we're going to talk about Reagan. So there was this really cool article I read called Ronald Reagan's Shameful Legacy, Violence, the Homeless, Mental Illness. And this article was really good. And so I learned from this article. Again, we're focusing on California here. So late in the 50s, this is prior to Reagan becoming governor. He was our governor. California was already leading the way to closing these state-run psychiatric hospitals that we talked about in the last episode. Yeah. And they were already starting to shift patients into group homes and boarding homes and nursing homes. And then in 1967, when Reagan was governor, he signed something called the Lanterman-Petrus Short Act. Mm-hmm. We're going to call it LPS moving forward. All right. Mm-hmm. And that virtually abolished involuntary hospitalization, except in extreme cases. And so in the 70s, by the time we got to the early 70s, California had already moved most mentally ill people out of state hospitals, and by passing LPS had made it super difficult to get them back into hospitals if they relapsed and needed additional care. And let's just say a lot of these people needed additional care.
100%.
Right. Could only be provided in a facility with round-the-clock care, not just round-the-clock care administered by psychiatric professionals, right? And so by 1975, board and care homes had become big business. And this is where we talk about the shadiness of Ronald Reagan. Yeah. So there's this company called Beverly Enterprises.
Oh, God, that sounds wrong. That sounds like something from like a bad superhero.
It's not good. Yeah, it's the name
owned by
says
Lex Luthor.
Right, Lex Luthor owned Beverly Enterprises. No, he didn't really. But Beverly Enterprises board of directors had ties to Governor Reagan, and the chairman was vice chairman of a Reagan fundraising dinner, and 4 others were either politically active in one or both of the Reagan gubernatorial campaigns, and or contributed large or undisclosed sums of money to the campaign.
Interesting.
Yeah, interesting. These financial ties between the governor, who was emptying state hospitals, and business persons who were profiting from the process would also soon become apparent in other states. So you saw this, like, I firmly believe, and we're going to talk more about this, there were people who were genuinely concerned about what was going on in institutions, state-run hospitals.
As they should have been.
Yes, absolutely. But I think that obviously with Reagan, there was financial incentive to do this. And so, a lot of these places that folks were being moved into in lieu of hospitals, they sucked. Yeah. They were bad. And a lot of residents, they either left voluntarily or surprised. They were kicked out because they were severely mentally ill and could not function in an environment like that.
Strange.
I know. Weird. They need actual psychiatric supervision and care.
This is literally like, it reminds me of the equivalent of, as we're talking about this, I encourage you to think about if this was cancer. Basically, this is the equivalent of kicking people out who need chemo, but can't get it. And you're going, well, figure it out.
Right. Yeah, you made a lot of cancer comparisons in the part 1 of this, and I think it's pertinent because we're talking about healthcare.
Yes.
Doesn't matter if it's physiological, like physical healthcare, or mental healthcare. Yeah. It's all healthcare.
Last time I checked, your brain is part of your body.
Yes.
So I don't know why we treat it separately in insurance.
It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't.
To me. Yeah. And so, all these people started leaving. And they didn't have anywhere to go. So they were living on the street. And then the term psychiatric ghetto was coined.
God, that's gross.
It's so sad. And California was the first state to witness not only an increase in homelessness associated with deinstitutionalization, but also an increase in incarceration and episodes of violence. We see that all the time.
God.
All the time, right?
A cycle.
It is a cycle, and we'll move into that. But before we do, I want to talk about some of the most heinous acts, and you and I both know, statistically speaking, most mentally ill folks aren't violent toward other people.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
It's not the norm.
No.
But it happens.
Absolutely.
And when I go over these 4 or 5 separate instances, you're going to see how these people, not only would they have benefited from an institutionalization, but the people they killed obviously would have benefited, right?
Yes, that's the saddest part of all of
it. It is really sad. It's preventable.
Yeah, 100%.
Preventable 100%. Because the signs were there.
Yeah.
So the first one is in 1970 is a guy called John Fraser. He was responding to the voice of God.
Oh, awesome.
Typical schizophrenic, right? Killed a prominent surgeon and his wife, 2 young sons, and a secretary. And Fraser's mother and wife had sought unsuccessfully to have him hospitalized. In 1972, we have Herbert Mullen, who I'm really familiar with. I think he's called the Earthquake Killer. He was responding to auditory hallucinations, and he killed 13 people over 3 months, including at least 1 child that I know of.
Oh, God.
He had been hospitalized 3 times, but released without further treatment. In 1973, we have Charles Super. He killed his wife, 3 children, and himself 2 weeks after being discharged from a state hospital. 1973, we have, we all know Ed Kemper. Edmund Kemper, he killed his mom and her friend and was charged with killing 6 other women. He was called the co-ed killer. 8 years earlier, because I think he stalked UC Santa Cruz where his mom worked.
That's right.
8 years earlier, he'd killed his grandparents. I think he was like 16 when he did this because he tired of their company. But at age 21, he'd been released from the state hospital without further treatment. This motherfucker was brilliant.
Yeah.
Like a literal genius. In the hospital that he was in, he was in like, I forgot what it was called, but it's in
Santa Cruz.
It might be Pescadero.
Yeah.
But anyway, he was so smart, and this is totally unethical, but they had him administering the psych battery test to other patients.
Bizarre.
Really bizarre.
Bizarre.
Really inappropriate.
And how surprising
unethical.
that a sociopath would be able to fool Psychiatrists.
That's really sad when you're able to fool psychiatrists.
Stupid.
We're supposed to know better, guys.
I know.
So there's Ed. Ed is probably the worst example here.
Yeah.
And then in 1977, we have someone named Edward Alloway, believing that people were trying to hurt him, killed 7 people at Cal State Fullerton. 5 years earlier, he had been hospitalized for paranoid schizophrenia, but released without further treatment. So again, we're focusing on California today, and more specifically San Francisco. But know that by the 1980s, when more and more hospitals were being shut down nationwide, like this became a nationwide issue.
Yeah.
And so again, we know that this isn't the norm, but Carolyn, you've been attacked by an unhoused person.
Well,
right?
and one thing I was going to add too is that think about the timeline of wars that were going on. Vietnam vets being released and or not released, but who were in VA hospitals suffering from PTSD and who were given heroin, all kinds of shit to cope. Yeah. And I remember being a kid in the 80s and walking around, you'd see vets out on the street, out in Union Square. And it was just this prevalence of growing up in the city and sort of having a familiarity that homeless people were in our city. Yeah. And sort of, I remember my parents just, the common thing was that just don't make eye contact.
We normalize it. Yes. For those of us who live in San Francisco or other metropolitan areas where homelessness is a major issue, common. We normalize it. Not only do we normalize it, but we steel ourselves and we tell ourselves, don't look, don't acknowledge humanity. Like, it is not acceptable. Yeah. Right.
Well, and so, that was the thing that got me into this during, this was like height of the pandemic, like super shelter in place, probably spring 2020. I'm taking my morning mental health walk. Nice. Yeah. Down Chestnut Street in the Marina District, which the Marina District, it's a weird place, douche wise, frat boy wise.
A lot of wealth. Yeah.
And usually the obscene thing you'll see is a drunken Marina girl kind of, vomiting on the outside of Barnum or something. Yeah. But, I would go during the pandemic, a lot of the hotels and motels that were on Lombard Street were given as housing and temporary housing.
They're called shelter in place housing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't uncommon. And again, people were exiting out of Union Square and like the financial district because no one was down there. I don't blame people. They're going to go where people are and where there's food and where there's traffic and stuff. Right. So I'm walking down the street and I see this guy, this very tall, white male albino man. And I just remember I had my earphones in and I kind of looked at him and I went, don't make eye contact with him. Something seems off. Right. So I walk by and all of a sudden I kind of feel a presence behind me and I turn around and I heard him ask me a question, which of course I ignored. And normally when I walk by people, I'll give my humanity. I'll smile. And I think you and I had talked about that. Like I'll always say, no, I'm so sorry. I don't have anything or whatever. And so I sort of felt a presence behind me and he was screaming at me for ignoring him. And he had a big giant piece of cardboard like box that he had broken down and he goes to whack me at it. And so I have my mace in my pocket, like finger on my mace, and I turn and I point at him. I say, get the fuck away or I will mace you. And I go to press on my mace and it doesn't come out.
No.
Of course. I know.
Failure.
Well, apparently if you threaten to mace someone and, it might agitate them if they're mentally ill. Yeah. And so he went fucking apeshit and starts hitting me with this box. Yeah. And again, in my head, I would have run, but my fight and flight took over and actually made me freeze. Yeah. Which I never knew that. Again, I'm pretty lucky. Nothing really shitty's ever happened to me, thank goodness. But I froze and I played dead.
You don't know how you're going to react.
I would never. If you would have told me that, I would not have known. Thankfully, there were people who came by and the police just happened to be down the street getting coffee or at the Apple store. I don't know what they were doing. And they detained him and they questioned him. And what he said to them was, well, she tried to mace me. I want to press charges. I was just trying to have a conversation with her. So he had the
wherewithal to be able to turn it around to make it seem like he was the victim.
And the police came back to me and said, hey, he said you tried to assault him.
Oh boy.
And I was like, well, no, I threatened to mace him. He was shouting at me and screaming. I said to get back. Yeah. And luckily there were two guys who were there were like, no, we saw the whole thing from across the street. But then they said, well, do you want to press charges? I said, of course not. Hopefully this guy gets some help. And they said, well, we're just going to release him. I see him all the time.
Yeah.
And it's really sad. And
people were coming up to you afterwards saying that he's done this before, right? Yeah. Like he's a staple in the neighborhood, unfortunately.
Well, and if you're on, I'm not a huge fan of Nextdoor because there's a lot of people just complaining about problems that they're not actually helping to fix. But, I looked up, there's people that I know and I see all the time, and people who punch women in the face.
Oh, Jesus.
I haven't seen that guy in a while.
Yeah.
But I also, during the pandemic, same thing, like saw a man reaching into a stroller and the mom wasn't looking. She just was turned around getting something. And I screamed, I said, hey, that man's touching your kid.
Yeah.
And I don't know what his intentions were, but you have to be
Your
really
instinct
vigilant.
over,
and I don't think the people in the marina were prepared
for the influx of
what this was. And the comment you would get is, oh, this is so disgusting. And it's like, well,
it's not disgusting.
It's not disgusting. It's actually a problem that's everywhere. Sorry, you don't live in the Tenderloin.
Right.
Sorry, you're in Seacliff and this is annoying you, but it's actually a part of living in a big city.
So we're talking about, for those of you who aren't from San Francisco, so the Tenderloin, and I'm going to talk about my experience working in the Tenderloin, but the Tenderloin is an area of San Francisco that has notoriously been plagued with not only homeless folks, but folks who are, I refer to as an open air drug bazaar. And unfortunately, it's been like this for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
And so, we've always had homeless kind of spread across San Francisco, but now the problem has become so pervasive that now you see unhoused folks and tents in areas where they weren't before. Like where Carolyn lives, you have some of the most high-end commerce, I guess you can say, and like most expensive properties, but it's everywhere. We have to do something.
Yes.
I'm not saying that to say, oh, they're butting up against like high-end commerce, and no, this is a human rights crisis.
Yeah. But that's the thing, that you heard these people who are used to living in their safe zones. Right. And it's like, this has been a problem forever. Sorry, they're in your hood now, right. But like if you're from here, you knew.
I can only hope that because this has become so widespread and so pervasive that we will have to change tact. Because I'm not saying we'll have to do something, because things are being done, right? Yeah. There are policies and there are tons of nonprofits that are out there and they're doing incredible work. And I work with a lot of them. Yeah. But there's a component that's missing, and we're going to get into that. And that component that we can't really do or have difficulty doing. Look, we're going to talk about the ACLU's role in this. And I love the ACLU. Typically, I did my internship with them in college, but on the issue of where they stand on homelessness, I wholeheartedly disagree with their policy. And I think it's costing lives, and I think it is costing people their dignity. I think they're dead wrong on this issue. So we're going to go into the ACLU's belief, basically, that it is a violation of one's civil liberties to medicate someone against their will and to institutionalize someone against their will. And so we're going to talk about the history here. So there was this lawyer. His name was Bruce Ennis, and he helped to shut down Willowbrook, which we talked about in our last episode. That's awesome. And from this article called Cleaning Up the Snake Pit, which is a reference to Willowbrook, in 1975, Bruce successfully litigated a case called O'Connor versus Donaldson before the Supreme Court. And the patient in question, he was advocating, Bruce was advocating that he should be freed and should receive damages for his unconstitutional custodial confinement. Donaldson was never a danger to himself or others and had been confined for 15 years. And during his confinement, he refused treatment while imploring health administrators and staff to release him. And the landmark decision affirmed that people with mental health disabilities who aren't a threat to themselves or others cannot be involuntarily deprived of their liberty. Now, this is one of those instances where it sounds like the person in question probably should not have been in this place.
100%.
And so what we're seeing we're seeing very real issues become the way that we inform how we deal with severe mental health issues
from like a policy perspective, which you can't do because these are individuals.
Right. It has to be looked at on a case by case basis. So now, according to the the same ACLU article that I just referred to, given the number of people who are homeless with mental health disabilities and the high rates of people with psychiatric disabilities in our jail and prisons, there are some well-intentioned persons who advocate reversion to institutionalization. I'm one of those people. What is needed instead is care of the sort that was provided for the former residents of Willowbrook as a result of the agreement that Bruce Ennis was able to negotiate with the state of New York. Okay. All right. Let's rewind. If you haven't listened to part 1, go back and listen to that shit. Because remember the stats I gave you all on the last episode regarding former Willowbrook patients? If you don't remember, I'm going to remind you. All right. So the New York Times article that I quoted in the last episode from 2020 said, in 2019 alone, 97 reported allegations of physical abuse by group home workers against Willowbrook alumni were recorded, according to internal state data obtained by the Times. So you're advocating for the level of treatment that Willowbrook alumni got once Bruce Ennis helped close Willowbrook, which should have been closed. And I'm sitting here telling you that just 2 years ago, they were able to get stats. The Times was able to obtain stats that said 97 separate instances of abuse were levied against these people.
Wow.
Okay? So the system is broken. This system that was created with good intention, I think.
Always.
Reagan is an outlier, right? He financially profited from these group homes, etc. I see the intention.
Absolutely.
But it has failed.
Yeah. Well, the impact of the intention is what we're talking about, never the intention.
Yes. And I get why the ACLU did what they did, but there was no new system created to humanely care for these folks, for the extremely mentally ill. They are on the streets. They're in prison. They're hurting themselves. They're hurting other people. And I think
there's no dignity in that.
There's no dignity in living in a fucking tent on the street and sleeping on the cold sidewalk and having nowhere to take a piss or a shit or shower. I'm sorry, I'm getting upset because we see this stuff every day and it is absolutely unacceptable. No human being should have to live like that.
And why does the ACLU have power to make? I don't know that
they're not therapists.
Well, I don't know that this is their wheelhouse.
No, it's not their wheelhouse.
I don't know why they're. I get the intention. I think for again, when we look at people of color who have been. I don't know what the word subjectified by the mental health industry and by research. Absolutely, sure. I want them covering that sector. Right. But they have no business being involved in this.
This is too blanket.
Yes.
This is a blanket administration dispensation of a rule that should not be applied to severely mentally ill people who need round the clock care. And, Dr. Robert H. Felix, he was the former director of the National Institute of Mental Health.
Love him.
Yeah, great guy. Major figure in the shift to community centers. He summed it up perfectly, I think, when he said, many of those patients who left the state hospitals never should have done so. We psychiatrists saw too much of the old snake pit, saw too many people who shouldn't have been there, and we overreacted. The result is not what we intended, and perhaps we didn't ask the question that should have been asked when developing a new concept. But psychiatrists are human too, and we tried our damnedest. It resonates. I get it. When you were seeing the worst, when you were seeing that footage from Willowbrook, I can understand the impulse to say, shut it the fuck down. Shut it all down.
Yeah.
And thinking, okay, we've got a system that's going to take care of these folks in a humane environment, but it did not pan out that way.
Yeah. And systemically, from a systems perspective, that doesn't make sense.
No.
Something's not working. You find the part. It's not the institution, the people that are housed in there. It's the staffing.
That's right.
It's the intake and it's the assessment and it's the care plans.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Right.
And the funding and and what are the checks and balances that are going on. That's what our country is supposed to be known for.
Yeah.
It's not just saying, oh, that didn't work. Let's be done with it.
Right.
Well, okay.
They threw the baby out with the bathwater.
At 100. That's great, yeah.
And what it amounts to is it's over-promising and under-delivering when it comes to community care. And some people really need conservatorship. Yeah. Not Brittany. Not Brittany. Sorry, there's not a comedy in this one, you guys, because we're hot about
We're
this.
about to make Brittany fans really pissed, though.
No, we don't think, Brittany is one of those people that should not have been conserved. But I will die on this fucking hill of conservatorship. And people are being funneled into jails and they're dying on our streets. Yeah. And we have very few psych beds in our city. We have Laguna Honda and General and maybe a few other scant beds.
Very small.
Yeah. And when someone is lucky enough to get a bed, they usually don't receive sustained long-term treatment. That's not what our system is about. Civil liberties don't fucking factor in here. This is a human rights crisis of epic proportions. Yesterday I saw a woman walking barefoot on the street. I dodge human shit and needles on a daily basis. And I'm not, this isn't like, ew, yucky, fuck them. This is, I don't blame them. Nobody should be taking a shit on the street. No. Like, people should have a toilet to take a dump in. This is America. Yeah. I thought this was America. But really, I mean, seriously, I'm so sad and I'm so done. And I think the majority of San Franciscans can relate.
Wow. And I like that you mentioned the desensitization that happens where, again, you're so used to it. It's actually surprising to me. I remember when I went to Chicago, although I went to urban Chicago, and I kind of commented like, oh, for a big city, I don't see a lot of homeless. And I remember saying that to my family, like, oh, they're here. They're just further out where there's more poverty. And I went, oh, yeah, of course, because they don't want people. And that's similar to what happened with downtown.
And it's similar to what happened in New York with Rudy Giuliani. Rudy Giuliani is obviously full-blown insane. Yeah. And talk about mental health issues. But people give him a lot of credit because he, quote unquote, cleaned up New York. He cleaned up Times Square. Yeah, he just moved people out. That's not taking care of the people. No. That's saying, oh, these people are a problem. Let's get rid of them so that tourism can flourish. That's not a viable solution. And it's not a humanitarian solution. No. So, I think it's important to go back and define conservatorship. So
I don't think most people actually understand what conservatorship is.
And there are different types of conservatorship. Yes. So, the legal conservatorship is the legal process where a court steps in to appoint someone to be in charge of your finances or other personal affairs if you're unable to make decisions on your own.
Which is a big fucking deal.
It's a huge deal.
Because we believe, first and foremost, that you have the right, as a human in America, you have the right of choice. Yeah. And a conservatorship is basically saying you don't get to choose anymore. Right. What happened to Brittany was unacceptable. For you. Yeah. We love Brittany. Yeah. We want her to be okay.
Yeah, free Brittany. We're glad she's free now.
She's freed.
And so there's a specific type of conservatorship in California called LPS conservatorship. So we're referring back to the Act of 1967 when Reagan was governor, right? So LPS conservatorship establishes authority over a conservatee who has a serious, defined mental illness resulting in an inability to care for him or herself. Mm-hmm. It starts with 30-day temporary appointment, but can be appointed in 1-year terms. Mm-hmm. It can be renewed or terminated at the end of each year. While an LPS conservatorship is just for the state of California, other states may have similar types of conservatorship proceedings. It may be known as mental health conservatorship, involuntary mental health conservatorship, psychiatric conservatorship, or another name depending on the state. And so if we talk about how many folks on the streets of San Francisco roughly are afflicted with severe mental illness, according to Aaron Alday's Chronicle article, public health experts believe roughly a third, and maybe many more.
I think it's more.
It's more. Of all homeless people in San Francisco are mentally ill, many of them battling severe conditions like schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder, and bipolar disorder. Yep. So, Carolyn, you're the clinician here. Woo woo. Yay, we have a clinician. I need a clinician's perspective. Okay. So, and this is kind of a loaded question. Yeah. I realize with the way that I wrote this, I might be putting words in your mouth, but I'm looking for your opinion. Yeah. Where do civil liberties end? And where does the need to administer often life-saving drugs and placing someone in a safe and controlled environment begin?
Well, and you're right. It's an absolutely loaded question because our healthcare system is not designed to improve health. Mm-hmm. It's designed to, it's ruled by pharmaceutical agencies and insurance agencies. Mm-hmm. mental health and medicine, in my opinion, as Carolyn. And again, blanket statement, I think there's really good people out there. I think they're doing really good work. I think there's really progressive people, harm reduction, things that are really trying to look at a complete systemic view. You're not just someone who is suffering with schizophrenia. It's trauma. It's the byproduct of living on the street and what that's done to you. But really what we're talking about is a system that profits by its constituents being sick. And so, one thing I want to point out is that the diagnostic criteria that would enable someone to fit a diagnosis of schizophrenia also inherently makes them ineligible for most of these programs. Because if you're going to get into housing and it's not a harm reduction space, if you're going to go into treatment or rehab, they're going to require things of you that you physiologically and behaviorally can't do because of your illness.
Like what?
Adhering to time limitations, adhering to codes and rules, regulations, not using substances. I mean, I think that, again, if it purely was just, this person's schizophrenic, okay, then that's, and also this mindset that, it's a mental illness, it's not a physical illness. It's absolutely a fucking physical illness. I get so angry when I hear that. And again, I've talked about this comparison, but it's like yelling at someone who has pneumonia because they're coughing. That's a product of their fucking illness. How dare you penalize them for being sick? But it's a type of sick that we don't like because we don't understand it. And we don't like looking at it. We don't like looking at it because it looks weird and it sounds weird unless it's profitable. Basquiat, most of our most amazing artists are completely mentally ill and substance abusers, but they make white people money. So then it's okay. But so, again, this is a long answer to that, but, I think the main issue is that the diagnostic criteria that we designate people to fit into to be able to receive a diagnosis inherently makes them unable to adhere to a lot of the rules and regulations that would get them eligible for housing and get them eligible for assistance programs. They're not going to be able to. God, I can barely fucking get myself to things on time. And I'm fine. You think someone who has schizophrenia and is hearing voices and hallucinating and paranoid, they're going to be able to go to a bright place with fluorescent lights where they're going to be asked a ton of questions by someone?
Where there's no requirement for them to take any sort of psychiatric medication.
That's not going to work. And so the other side too of that is that, if you are unstable in that sense, you're not going to be able to adhere to your medication management.
That's right. You can't do this independently.
I mean, I'll just say, ladies, how many times have you forgotten to take your birth control?
My mother-in-law is like early stages dementia, but not even that bad. And we had to put her in a care facility because she couldn't manage her own medication. And so that's the thing. And also pharmaceutical companies, it's newer that we're starting to give injectable 30-day type treatment, a very amazing drug called naltrexone, Vivitrol, which is the injectable form. That's for heroin addiction, right?
Heroin, any type of opioid. Okay. But specifically for alcoholism too. Oh, interesting. And so, we have to remember that we can't penalize people for not following through on the behavioral things that they're not able to physiologically do. That's not fair. You wouldn't get mad at a kindergartner because they forgot something. You would go to the parents and say, well, hey, you need to help them do this. Right. And so a lot of these programs, and again, I think it's changing because we do. And again, harm reduction, I'm a big fan of harm reduction. I know that's very controversial, but they require behavioral expectations, even to get into a lot of residential programs for alcoholism. Part of you can't go in if you're still using, or if you say you still want to use. Right. And so we're not doing our due diligence and our, again, really thinking about how this then is a revolving door. And I think that's the biggest thing. And so then you get into, okay, we've got burned out staff. You couldn't pay me to go work. I couldn't even hang in a Medi-Cal funded program. exhausting for me and felt completely depressing, and like I wasn't able to actually do my job because I was so burnt out from paperwork.
Yeah.
And so you've got people who are not being paid well. They're they're burnt out. Their caseload's humongous.
Yeah, the bureaucracy is insane.
And they're dealing with that revolving door. Yeah. And so you're asking for such a low, downstream effort with something you mentioned, policy and legislation.
Yeah.
It has to be both.
Yeah.
And so, no, I absolutely don't think that you can require someone who inherently, because of their illness, cannot have that decision-making capacity.
Right.
If you're and again, you'll look at this in a legal setting where none of this ever makes sense to me. Mm-hmm. And this is usually where I lose it when I'm watching a lot of true crime stuff, is when they get to the legal system.
Yeah.
And they're saying, oh, well, they didn't know because they were, mentally ill, or they were hearing things. Well, then why would that same person, if that's true, and you're using that as a reason that they're, should be excused for something or shouldn't have a different type of punishment, well, we can't hold them accountable to the same type of rules that we would have for someone who does have cognitive abilities and behavioral abilities and social abilities. Yeah. Not to mention that I'm going to require someone to make it to an appointment when they have no way to get there. Mm-hmm. They maybe haven't eaten, or they're living on the street, so they could have been a victim of crime. Yeah. And so you're setting people up to fail. Yeah. And you're making it Sisyphus, the guy who, he'd roll the Sisyphusian challenge. I love using that word in all my grad school papers, and I still can't say it. But you're asking people to roll a giant boulder up a hill, and it keeps falling back on them.
So say I'm a lawyer with the ACLU, and I'm like, hey, Carolyn, this person who is incredibly schizophrenic and doesn't know what day of the week it is, and is 100% incapable of caring for themselves, because we believe that it would be a violation of their civil liberties to put them in a facility.
Nope.
What do you say?
Fuck no.
Yeah.
Fuck no. Well, and here's the thing. I would want to see, okay, fair. Let's set them up with housing. Yeah. Let's set them up with people who care about them and are going to make sure they get, basic, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yeah. You're going to have safety. You're going to have housing. You're going to have access to clean water and food. Yeah. And we're going to give you some medication. Yep. Let's reevaluate this in 6 months to a year. Right. With all that, then I'm able to say, does this person have capacity? Because my guess is, they're probably schizophrenic, but at this point, they're living in poverty. Mm-hmm. They're disaffiliated from their families and from human contact. Mm-hmm. And they're victims of crime. They're incredibly vulnerable. They're probably addicted to substances, because fuck, I would be too if I had the trauma that they did. Yeah. I'd fucking want to be high too. Yeah. So you can't say that. Yeah. That doesn't make any sense. You cannot look at someone for that one thing and not look at it systemically. I'm so sorry. They're going to have to do this case by case. Yeah, it has to be case by case. And, what I learned in grad school, my background is in human rights education. My master's degree, useless. No, I'm kidding. It actually plays into what I do now. But there is a big difference between human rights and civil rights. Yes. And what I'm looking at this human rights lens. 100%. Not a civil rights lens. Nope. And the ACLU is about civil liberties and civil rights. Yep. Let's talk about human rights. Well, and from a perspective too, that we know that if you are unhoused, again, I'm looking at people that have so much fucking trauma. You did not ask to be schizophrenic. No. That is a biological, that's something you're living with. Right. That's an illness. Yep. How dare we treat someone who's ill? Would you do the same to someone with autism? Would you do the same to someone who had, fucking half the shit that we have to deal with, And again, it's worse with men, but it's doubly as bad with women and people of color. Yeah. And it's going to lower your life expectancy. And you're absolutely right. It's the dignity side of it. Yeah. That we are not doing a service to someone if we are just saying, nope, sorry, they have rights. Now go back on the street. Right. And enjoy your rights. Yeah, that's your right. That's your right. On the street to live in poverty and not have clean water and access to food. That's bullshit. Sorry. That is absolute bullshit. Yeah. I can't see the argument. I really can't. I really, again, I might be stupid. I might be missing something, but it doesn't make any sense to me.
You're not missing something. You're a clinician. You're who the ACLU should be talking to when it comes to matters like this. And now I don't know how other clinicians necessarily feel about this. I think it runs the gamut. And we are trying to do things in San Francisco, but what we're trying to do doesn't go far enough. Like we passed something called Mental Health San Francisco. So this is legislation that passed, I think within the last couple of years, it passed through our Board of Supervisors, right? And there's a provision for conservatorship. And as of February of this year, only 2 people have been remanded to conservatorship. There's nowhere to put people. And there's also a reluctance to implement conservatorship. I think that I don't remember what the threshold is for putting somebody in conservatorship, but it's like...
It's almost impossible.
It's almost impossible.
And the time scale, even of people who want to be conserved. When I worked for Jewish Family Children's Services, we would have elderly people who wanted to be conserved.
Yes.
They couldn't figure this out anymore.
No.
The other thing I was going to add, too, that I totally forgot was if you've ever actually taken a psychiatric drug, you're comatose. The side effects, our pharmaceutical industry is doing a disservice too. They just make people comatose.
Yeah. And manageable.
Yeah. You're not alive. You're not living. Yeah. So I actually understand where some people don't want to take a medication.
I mean, I worked with this population and a lot of them said, I don't like taking the drugs. I don't like the way they make me feel.
And I believe it.
Yeah. No, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So we have Mental Health San Francisco. And now on a statewide level, there's something called Care Court that just passed. And this was
not Night Court.
Not Night Court. I wish it was Night Court. But Care Court. And I can't remember for the life of me what the acronym stands for. And I'm not going to delve into all the aspects and opposition here. We don't have time for that shit. But just know that it passed the legislature, I think just a month or 2 ago, with overwhelming support from Republicans and Democrats. And Care Court is the first in the nation framework to empower individuals suffering from untreated schizophrenia and other psychiatric disorders. And from Governor Newsom's website, Care Court will provide individuals with clinically appropriate, community-based, and court-ordered care plans consisting of culturally and linguistically competent county mental health and substance use disorder treatment services. These include short-term stabilization medications, wellness and recovery support, social services, and housing.
Bingo.
Services are provided to the individual while they live in the community. Plans can be between 12 to 24 months. In addition to their full clinical team, the client-centered approach also includes a volunteer supporter to help individuals make the self-directed care decisions and an attorney. So there's a lot of issues or purported issues with this. One is, okay, you're saying you're going to remand them to housing, for instance. We don't have a sufficient amount of housing. Right. That's a huge problem. Also, how are the courts going to handle this? Because this is something that's going to go through our courts. And it hasn't been, as far as I know, quite laid out how it's going to go. But it's something. Yeah. And, advocates for homeless and disabled people, a lot of them strongly disagree with the idea that the city should force more people into treatment, arguing that officials should instead invest in more services that don't strip people of their autonomy, like supportive housing.
But this is what treatment is.
Yeah.
Treatment is getting you and I think that's what we need to understand. It's not just penalizing you for what you're suffering with.
Yeah.
And having, God bless police officers, but they have no business having to deal with this type of shit.
Yeah. And they're not, we say God bless police officers, but at the same time, the way that they handle this, and you've seen it
firsthand.
A lot of them don't do it with the care and consideration.
There's not trauma-informed care, and they are overworked, and they have no business. They have no. I will say the community, the crisis intervention team that the city has is a start.
But the HOT team, so we have the homeless outreach team, right? The HOT team. If I call the HOT team, it's a recording. Leave a message. I've called the HOT team before because I don't want to call the cops. I want to call the HOT team. I want to call people whose specialty it is to assist people living on the street in crisis.
Well, the intention is that it's a social worker or a psychiatrist or a therapist and a paramedic.
Yeah.
But still, at the end of the conversation, it's, well, do you want to go?
Right.
And, even to SF General or Laguna Honda. And even then, I think it's
voluntary.
It's voluntary.
And you're asking somebody who doesn't have the psychological capacity to make that decision. And this is what I think it's important to clarify. when we say defund the police, this is what we're talking about.
Yes.
We're talking about diverting some of the funding that goes to police to go toward, a more, I don't want to say more capable, but a better financed hot team, right? Or, more social workers.
Well, I watched, a bunch of big guys, paramedics, firemen, and police officers trying to assist a woman who was dealing with a full-blown panic attack.
Yeah.
And they were standing around her saying, get up, stand up, we can't hear you. And I jumped in and I said, she can't. I witnessed her just get assaulted.
Yeah.
And they actually yelled at me and said, get back.
Those are burnt out people.
Yes.
Like, I'm not making excuses for the behavior, but they're dealing with shit that they should not be dealing with. And I think they're burnt out.
Absolutely.
And then they do things that are absolutely inexcusable.
Yeah.
I this isn't a blanket statement, but we see it time and time again.
In that situation, that's what I felt.
Yeah.
I was intimidated by them.
Yeah. No,
I was frightened. I called you crying after that. I was like, what the fuck just happened?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
it's awful.
It is awful. It is awful. So a lot of folks who aren't down with systems like care court and institutionalization, they advocate for things like, I was starting to say, supportive housing. So, let's talk about supportive housing.
Yes, do tell,
So for some, it definitely works. But for those who have untreated mental illness plus substance use disorder, this environment often does not provide the structure and support needed. And how do I know? Oh, because I worked in supportive housing in the Tenderloin.
Oh, I'm so glad you don't do that anymore.
I know. I'm not going to name the organization by name, but they are the biggest. They're the biggest one.
Okay.
And, I want to talk about what supportive housing often looks like. And this is from an SFist article. We have, really busted ass, vermin infested, single room occupancy hotels. So what those are these single room buildings that at one point were hotels with like communal kitchens, communal bathrooms, and they've been turned into permanent supportive housing. We have case managers, not mental health professionals or clinicians, mind you, who don't stick around for long. They're underpaid and they're working in incredibly unsafe conditions. How do I know? Because I saw it every day for a year. There's the harm reduction model. And I do like harm reduction, but with some folks, it does not work.
Right.
Especially when they're extremely mentally ill and they also have substance use disorder. Then it's just a full-blown like trauma explosion in the halls.
And true harm reduction comes from a recovery model for substance abuse.
That makes sense.
That I wouldn't necessarily use harm reduction.
Yeah.
And someone with schizophrenia.
Oh, dude.
It doesn't translate.
It does not. Absolutely. I remember getting a call at like 1 a.m. They're like, a couple residents went to the hospital. They turned pool cues into like sharp implements and started jousting each other. I'm like, oh shit. Like that's the kind of stuff that we would see on a regular basis. Yeah. And also the staff, not across the board, but some of the staff was, to say they were ill-equipped is an understatement. We had a case where a staff member beat the shit out of a resident.
Oh no.
On camera. And they couldn't, his union was vigorously defending him. Now I love this union. This is my union too, but they were vigorously defending this guy.
For beating someone?
Beat this guy for no reason on camera. What? Beat him. And we had him dead to rights on camera and we could not get rid of him. So, in a lot of these places, we're talking about, again, not across the board, but staff like that, right? Wow. And so also another factor is that services and treatment, they're completely voluntary. You can say, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And you can continue to, one of the buildings that I oversaw was for seniors and people would be like, oh, cute, you have the seniors. I'm like, no, these motherfuckers are ODing in their wheelchairs. Oh, like I'd be walking down the hall and be like, is that dude okay? They're like, oh yeah, so-and-so just, overdid it on the booze. And he's just like in the wheelchair.
How lovely.
Pass the fuck out. Yeah.
That's disgusting.
Not harm reduction done right as far as I'm concerned.
Harm reduction is we don't want you to have dirty needles. We're going to give you clean needles.
Right.
That's what
right.
harm reduction
That's
is.
right. Yep. And
not this.
This made a lot of sense to me. So I'm not saying this is the organization I worked at, but In this article, Randy Shaw, the director of the Tenderloin Housing Clinic, defends the buildings that his organization manages and shifts some blame to problem tenants, including those with hoarding issues, which attract vermin. Saw that firsthand.
Blame the victim.
Yeah. Well, but he's right. And those who are otherwise mentally ill or drug dependent.
Yeah.
We throw all these, this is where it makes sense. We throw all of these people into hotels who have no demonstrated ability to live independently, who have severe problems and need to be elsewhere. Yes. That's what he told the Chronicle. He added, is every person a victim? There's no question there's a greater challenge housing our population because of the difficulty with these tenants themselves. He is absolutely right. But what he's saying is, yes, your initial reaction, that's how a lot of people feel, but he's right. A lot of the folks who are in these situations, they are not good candidates for these places because these places don't have the clinical staffing.
Well, they need wraparound services.
And they have them, but they're voluntary. They're completely voluntary. Dude, there was a guy in one of the buildings that I was in who tried to burn the building down not once, but twice. He was extremely schizophrenic. The first time he deliberately let stuff boil down in a crock pot and was outside. There was smoke coming out of the building and he was dancing around. He's like, burn this motherfucker down. Mentally ill. Yeah. And then the next time he tried to burn the place down, he deliberately burned some chicken in the oven and let it burn and kept telling the janitor, God bless the janitor, oh, leave it alone. It's supposed to smoke when it's cooking. And the janitor was like, no, blood, nah. He tried to burn the place down multiple times.
Again, that's someone who clearly is suffering. Yeah. That you're not in your right mind if that's your intention.
Oh, yeah. We're talking about severe bed bug infestations. My final straw at this place was when they came to me. They're like, Jen, we found bed bug eggs in your office. And I'm like, oh, I gotta go. I can deal with mentally ill people. I can deal with people who have substance use disorder. Yeah. I cannot deal with women. No. I remember for the holidays, we brought KFC to the building with the elderly people. I know. And we were getting everything prepared in the communal kitchen. And we were literally there were roaches coming at us. Gross. Roaches charging us. And
that sounds like a place I'd like to live and recover.
Right. And it's he's right in the sense that folks who have hoarding and cluttering disorder and schizophrenia and a bunch of stuff, they're bringing stuff in off the street.
Yeah, no shit.
Yeah, I watched it. I saw it every day. We'd have to inspect units where the hoarding was absolutely out of control. God. And these aren't candidates who are going to thrive in a supportive housing facility.
Absolutely not. And again, no fucking shit.
Yeah. Yeah, I had this dude I went to high school with. Coincidentally, I ran into him when I was working at this place.
Oh, no way.
And he had, right before I realized that we were working in the same place, he was cleaning the light fixture in the elevator, which kind of descended down on a couple of prongs, and somebody had hid a needle up there.
Oh, no.
And he poked himself.
Oh, shit.
And he went ballistic. Which makes total sense. And I think they were trying to get him to calm down. And I'm like, I wouldn't be calm. I'd be fucking going crazy.
Yeah.
Crazy. But that's harm reduction. Yep. And I'm not saying across the board harm reduction is a bad thing. I'm just saying the way it was being implemented at these facilities, at these housing places was not right. Yeah. It was a danger. Yeah. It was dangerous. And so, after witnessing this stuff myself, it's clear to me that not everybody survives in this environment, at least not the supportive housing we have in my town. And different groups of homeless folks need different solutions and interventions. Yeah. The folks who lost a job and are living in their car, they need different support than than the man I saw 2 weeks ago when I turned my fucking car down the street to go to the lot where I park, because I work in downtown San Francisco. This man had his pants around his ankles and was vigorously jerking off in the fucking street. Yeah,
nice.
He was into
Good
it.
For him.
But fortunately, I got the back view. But anyway, I say this to say, and then I got out of my car, parked my car, and then I went into my cafe where I got my coffee. How white do I sound? And I seen the dude in the street on Market Street, which is a main artery through San Francisco, having a full-blown schizophrenic episode. Pants still around his ankles.
Right on. Yeah.
That That guy is not a suitable candidate for supportive housing. Not the kind of supportive housing we have.
No.
That guy needs round-the-clock care, most likely.
Yeah.
And, if supportive housing is going to work for people who have extremely severe mental illness, maybe we should start with having, clinicians on staff.
That would be nice.
Giving case managers fewer clients because case managers aren't clinicians. They're usually people, I think we talked about this in the last episode, usually people who have lived similar lives. Yeah. So they can relate. That's invaluable. Absolutely. And I think they have a place within the system. Absolutely. But you need clinicians. Yeah. So, it just, what we have doesn't go far enough. No. And I think that politicians they're afraid. They're afraid to say, okay, we need to put these folks in a place where, they're taken care of. Yeah. Because of where we came from. Yeah. We have an abysmal history, and I understand that. But again, throwing out the baby with the bathwater was not the solution. Yeah.
Well, and we're really talking about, we've mentioned schizophrenia a lot of times. I don't think people really understand the actual medical diagnoses that we're dealing with. Yeah. These are people whose brains, which is an organ in your body. So sorry, this is a public health concern. Yeah. So we're talking about people with bipolar, depression, schizophrenia, anxiety. But, 9 times out of 10, in my opinion, those are the manageable things. Mm-hmm. But when you are dealing with that and you come from a family system that doesn't know what to do with that, you're probably going to be a victim of crime, or you're going to perpetuate crimes. Yeah. You're probably going to be on substances because those, surprise, surprise, they fucking work because they help you dissociate from the shit you're hearing in your fucking head. Yep. And then so we have basically a circular thing that's going and reinforcing the health concerns and then the homelessness. But these are people who are in extreme psychiatric distress. They're self-medicating and they're dealing with poverty and violence, and it's being reinforced this cycle. And then the only people that are dealing with them are the court system. That's right. Maybe they might come across a social worker or a case manager, or they're funneled into the criminal justice system, right. Which is just inhumane. That is not fair to talk about taking someone's rights away. Right. Why is that okay? Right.
Because they languish in jail until they can find them a group home to go into temporarily, where they ultimately end up on the street again. Yeah.
Well, then they actually do commit a crime. Yes. And then they filter into our legal system. Right. But really,
and they don't belong there.
They have no business being there. Nope. And if people had done the downstream the upstream appropriate care, right, we would, these are people who are maybe coming through the foster system. Yeah. You wouldn't tell a bunch of kindergartners to be in a housing, in a school environment where nobody's fucking watching them. Right. There's no reason that we can't treat people with mental illness and mental health issues the same way we look at kindergarten. That you have a supportive place that has some freedom and some autonomy, but you have people that are helping you.
That's right.
Helping you be successful. That's dignity. Yep. Let me help you become a functioning member of society, or find something that helps you at least feel like you matter.
Yep. So I agree. We know that the old system was fucked up, or at least aspects of it were extremely messed up. But we're dealing with straight up human rights crisis in our streets. And many of our unhoused neighbors are dealing with severe mental illness, and they need medication. And some, dare I say, might need institutional level care. We could do better than Willowbrook. We can do better than the fucked up group homes that a lot of Willowbrook alum ended up in. And I know this is just my opinion and Carolyn's opinion, but some folks are just not cut out for the supportive housing system, not the way it's currently structured. And we have to do something, and it has to be something better than what we're doing now. It can't be a one-size-fits-all approach, and we can't leave folks to live on the streets intense in filth. This isn't good for anyone. Yeah. And this is the city where the universal... God damn it, Carolyn dropped her mic. But San Francisco, if you don't know it, it's the city where the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed. Mm-hmm. So I am confident we could do better.
Yeah, I don't want the Brandy Melville of mental health. One size fits all.
Yeah, no, we don't need that. So, just want to end this by saying, I know what we're saying. There's a bit of controversy to it.
And it's heavy.
And it's heavy.
And it's uncomfortable.
But we felt like it was imperative to talk about this. Yeah.
If you feel uncomfortable, that means that you're doing all right.
Yep. No, totally. And especially if you're a listener who lives in San Francisco, I think this will resonate with you, whether you agree with us or not.
Yeah.
So anyway, now that we've totally fucking bummed you out.
Don't worry, we'll get back to some bad dating and shit later on.
we hope the next episode actually is going to be the history of porn.
Cool.
So actually I shouldn't say that because we might not release that in sequence. So that's
okay.
Anyway,
stay tuned.
There's fun stuff coming, but sometimes we're going to do some heavy shit. So deal with it. All right, everybody. Good night. Bye.